So today we continue our series. It's a series we started well over a month ago, The Emotions of God. There was a 2-week break in there. 2 weeks ago I wasn't able to be present. We were going to talk about this topic that we're going to talk about this morning. I thought it best to stay home rather than to share what it was that was affecting and making my body feel so unwell, sick. And then last week we had our baptism service, which was a great Sunday. So today we get back to this, understanding the heart of God, recognizing that God has emotions. So through the summer we worked through a series praying through our emotions. We have emotions. And this series is designed to challenge us and to help us to understand that God has emotions too. And so we looked at how we can grieve God in the first week of the series, and then we talked about how God has this emotion of care and concern. He has a care and concern for us as people. And then the third week in the series, we talked about how we can please God. God can be satisfied, or we can extend displeasure to God by the way that we choose to live in front of Him. And today what we're going to see is that God can get angry. This isn't a pretty or an easy conversation because God has anger, and that evokes all kinds of questions. Because when we think about people who get angry, there's a picture that comes to our mind, and it is not a good picture. Take, for example, this picture. So many of you are sports fans. I'm a sports fan. Yay, Phillies. But I am largely an NFL fan, and in particular a Buffalo Bills fan. So I know some of you could care less about the Bills. There's a few of us around here who are Bills fans. Go Bills today, and hopefully we'll be successful against the Chiefs. Sorry, Chiefs fans. But a couple of weeks ago, the Bills were unsuccessful in a game against the Miami Dolphins. They lost a close nail-biter. And they had an opportunity to win the game right at the end, but they lost. They came up short. And the big news the day after wasn't so much that the Bills lost, but it was the response of their offensive coordinator to the loss. And so we're going to play a clip here, a video clip here. It's a 6-second clip that we're going to loop through 3 times of the response of Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator, right at the end of the game. So let's play that clip. No volume? Okay, there was some sound that was supposed to go with that. And obviously, Ken Dorsey, Betsy, you're here laughing, and I laugh every time I see that clip. It's just like, the guy just lost it, right? he's just out of control. He had to get censured by the NFL. He's smashing up tablets. They called him out for doing this. The tablets are given to the NFL. And so it was a big news story. The response of Ken Dorsey, a guy who let his anger get the best of him. Now, sometimes we as people allow our anger to get the best of us. And when you see an image like that, and you consider that God gets angry, you kind of go, is that how God behaves? Is that what God is like? And then perhaps you begin to think of some stories, some Old Testament stories. And there are over 80 different times in the Old Testament where we see that God is said to be a God who burns with anger. And here's a couple, just a quick few snapshots of God getting angry. Exodus 32, Moses is on the Mount of Sinai, and he's receiving the 10 Commandments from God. And the nation of Israel turns to idolatrous worship. And this is what we read in Exodus 32 in God's response to Moses. He said, I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. This sounds like a Ken Dorsey kind of God, a God who's lost it. He's come unglued. He's smashing everything around them. He is angry, and he says, let my anger burn against them so that I can destroy them, like Dorsey destroyed the tablet. That's just one example. And you can flip over to Numbers chapter 11. This event takes place 2 years later. And in this event, we find verse 1 of chapter 11. Now the people complained about their hardship in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused. His anger was aroused. And then fire from the Lord burned among them. And he consumed some of them. God's anger is so intense that he sends a fire. His anger, he's burning, he's seething, and he sends a fire. Looks like Ken Dorsey smashing a tablet. A little later on in Numbers chapter 11 and sometime later in the life of this nation, but again, very early in the life of the nation, while they're out in the wilderness, we encounter this story. But while they were complaining about having food, and in particular meat to eat, and so God sends meat to eat for them in the form of birds that fly over the nation and fall to the ground. But while the meat was still between their teeth, and before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. God is so angry that he's like a snorting bull whose fire is coming out of his nostrils, and he smites the people with a plague. You can go a little bit later into Numbers chapter 25, and we read this story. The men began to indulge in sexual immorality. So this is the nation of Israel who go to neighboring tribes. They find the neighboring women, and they begin to indulge in sexual immorality. Sex outside the context of marriage between a man and a woman. They're engaging in sexual immorality with Moabite women who invited them to the sacrifices of their gods. The people ate, they bowed down before these gods, and so they're worshiping these false gods. And the text tells us that the Lord's anger burned against them. And the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of these people, all of them, and kill them, and expose them in broad daylight before the Lord. So the Lord's fierce anger may turn away from Israel. But those who died in the plague numbered 24,000 people. God comes unglued, it seems. His anger is so intense, it seems as though he cannot control himself, and he kills 24,000 people because of their act of sexual immorality and worshiping false gods. On and on and on the stories go. Like I said, over 80 times you can read of God's anger burning against people. Now, of course, this creates a disturbing image. What kind of God is this? It's led some people to conclude that God is a really bad guy, and it's even led them to places of concluding that there must be no God, because if this is the kind of God that the Bible talks about, there must be no God. And one such individual is Richard Dawkins, and Richard Dawkins is an atheist, and he wrote a book in which he wrote these words. Go to the next slide, please. He said, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. How about that, right? So he sees the Bible as being fictitious. He sees God as being a fairy tale. He is fictitious, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, that means somebody who has lots of desire for revenge, which obviously must be rooted in lots of anger. He's bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser. That sounds like a really angry person. He's pestilent, which means destructive to life. There must be a lot of anger rooted in that. He's capriciously, which means changes suddenly. That sure goes with the emotion of anger. And he's a malevolent bully, which means he wishes to do evil to others, which must be rooted in anger as well. When you read the Old Testament and you read of these stories, this definitely is a conclusion that people come to. God can't be anybody who's good if this is who he is. Because we can look at a video of Ken Dorsey and go, that guy is out of control. His behavior is inappropriate. He can get called out. And he gets fined because of his behavior. And everybody looks at it and says, that's wrong. And this is over a silly little football game and the destruction of a tablet and a few other material items. And when you look at God and killing people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, because he gets angry at them, this evokes a serious question of who is God and what kind of God is he? And certainly for people who have grown up in environments in which they've seen anger, they've experienced anger, maybe in homes or in workplaces, that anger has deeply harmed them as an individual, then to read of these stories that God behaves like this brings up a big question. God's got a PR problem here. Somebody's got to do some explanation for him. And right? I mean, like, how do you manage this? But this is what we find in Scripture. And so it raises a big question. That God has the emotions of anger, and it seems as though it's uncontrollable anger. It seems like it's unrighteous anger, right? It seems like it's sinful anger. It seems like this is a wrong kind of reaction and behavior. And this morning we're going to dig into this question. We're going to look at a passage of Scripture that evokes these questions. It comes from 1 Chronicles chapter 13. And yes, as we read, continue to reflect on what kind of God is this who behaves in this way. 1 Chronicles 13, this is a story in which the nation of Israel is now being led by King David. Saul had led the nation for 40 years. He was a failure of a king. He did not lead the nation closer to God, but further away. David takes over, and these events are probably some 20 to 30 years into David's reign. And we read these words. I'm just going to read the text, and then we're going to unpack it. 1 Chronicles 13, verse 1, David conferred with each of his officers, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, and he said to them, the whole assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you, and if it is the will of the Lord our God, let us send word far and wide to the rest of our brothers throughout the territories of Israel, and also to the priests and the Levites who are with them in their towns and pasture lands, to come and join us. To come and join us to do what? Well, the next part tells us. Let us bring up the ark of our God back to us, for we did not inquire of it during the reign of Saul. The ark of God, we talked about the ark in the last message in this series, in which King Solomon had prayed and given and had asked for wisdom in a dream that he had received. And then he offered sacrifice, and we talked about the ark and where it was located at the time. The Ark of the Covenant is this place that God gave to the people. It was a box that was made out of acacia wood. And God told the nation, in this box, put the 10 Commandments and a jar of manna and Aaron's rod that buds. And you can read all about this in Exodus 30 and on. But build this box and then put 2 angels on the ends of it out of gold facing in. And right in between these angels, this will be the place that I meet with you. The box is this visible picture to the nation of Israel of the tangible presence of God. God dwells, so to speak, between those angels and that ark. And David says the ark has been out of sight. Saul didn't inquire of God. Saul didn't go to the ark. I haven't, in my leadership, inquired of God at the ark. It's just been off somewhere in somebody's barn, sitting around for 70 plus years. So let us bring the ark of God back to us, David says in verse 2. For we did not inquire of it during the reign of Saul. So the whole assembly agreed to do this because it seemed right to all the people. So these are his leaders. He's rallying the leaders to say, let's return our hearts and our minds to God. Let's bring God back to the center of our nation. And let's do this. Let's get the whole nation on board. So David assembled all the Israelites from the Shihor River in Egypt. I'm going to mess up all these names. To Lebo Hamath. And if you can't read them, that's okay. This is English of words and places that we're not comfortable with, and that's okay. So to bring the ark of God from Kiriath Jearim, David and all the Israelites with him went to Bala of Judah, Kiriath Jearim, to bring up from there the ark of God, the Lord who is enthroned between the cherubim. Right there it is, right there's the description. The Lord who is enthroned between the cherubim, the ark that is called by the name. So they moved the ark of God from Abinadab's house on a new cart. Okay, this is really significant. And when you read the Old Testament, you see these little odd statements like, why are we being told this? Why are we being told that there's a new cart? Something important's coming. So they moved the ark of God from Abinadab's house on a new cart with Uzziah and Ohio guiding it. These are 2 Samuel 6 tells us the whole story. Chronicles the same story. And these are his sons, okay? His sons are guiding this new cart. And David and all the Israelites were celebrating with all of their might before God with songs and with harps and lyres and tambourines and cymbals and trumpets. So this is this big, huge parade. And when they came to the threshing floor of Canaan, Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark because the oxen had stumbled. And the Lord's anger burned against Uzziah because of his irreverent act. And he struck him down because he had put his hand on the ark. And so he died there before God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzziah. And to this day, that place is called Perez Uzziah. David was afraid of God that day. And he asked, how can I ever bring the ark of God to me? So he did not take the ark to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of God remained with the family of Obed-Edom in his house for 3 months. And the Lord blessed his household and everything that he had. All right, so chronologically, this story occurs after David becomes king. David conquers many nations. He brings peace to the nation. He begins to build, and he does build, his palace in the city of Jerusalem. So he establishes Jerusalem as the capital of the nation. And at this point, probably some 20 years into, maybe 30 years into his reign, after he's done fighting, peace has come, Jerusalem is the capital, he now determines Jerusalem needs to be the center of the nation and God needs to be the center of the nation. And so we're going to return the Ark of the Covenant to the center. Now, what's the Ark of the Covenant and where has it been and why is it being brought on a cart? All of those are questions that as you read through this story come up unless you know some history and you know what has been taking place in the life of the nation. Some 8 years earlier, King Saul went to battle against the Philistines, and he took the Ark of Covenant into battle like a rabbit's foot, so as to protect them, right? This magical box we're going to take out there, and we're going to get the box to protect us. Well, they lost the battle. The Philistines captured the Ark and took it back home. Eventually, God cursed the Philistines, so the Philistines sent the Ark back to the nation of Israel, and they built a cart. And they had oxen hooked up to the cart. They put the ark on the cart and sent the oxen off to the direction of Israel. When the oxen brought the cart to the nation, the group of people in Israel who found that, took the ark off of that cart. They got the Levites, the priests, to do that. And then they had a party, and then some men touched the ark. There were 70 of them who looked inside the ark, and they were all struck dead. And so the nation again was afraid, and so those people took the ark and they sent it to Adinbad, who we find as the character here. And they have the ark dedicated, set apart. They have Eleazar, his son, to kind of watch after the ark. And so it sits in his barn for some 70 years. And this is where the ark is. It's been sitting in the barn because the last time anybody did anything with the ark, they were killed. And so now David says, go get that ark and bring it back. So what is it that the people do? Well, they decide, like the whole nation decides, this is a good thing. Let's do this. Their hearts are turning back to God, and they go and they get the ark. They build this new cart. They put the ark on the cart. David is dancing. Now, you got to picture this scene. This is the whole nation. So the names of the cities go to the south and they go to the north. And what the writer is telling us is that the whole nation comes together. There's hundreds of thousands of people who gathered together. It's kind of like the Vince Lombardi Trophy going through Philadelphia a couple of years ago after the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Remember that? Remember the scenes of that? Some of you were actually there. You went downtown Philadelphia and you saw this. Like over 700,000 people gathered for this parade, right? And the players went through, but the trophy was everything, right? The trophy signified the victory. And so there's this big parade for the trophy, a big parade for the Eagles, and the same thing is happening here. There's a big parade. The Ark of the Covenant is returning to the center of the nation, and everybody is partying. There's a celebration. And you have to imagine in this moment, at least I have to imagine in this moment, that God must have been incredibly pleased with the nation. The nation is turning back to God. What a beautiful celebration. What a wonderful thing. God must have been pleased with David to know that this is David's heart, that David's heart is to return to God, to return the nation back to God. David must have been incredibly pleased to see the response of the entire nation to say, hey, we're on board. Let's make God the center of our lives. This is the scene, a huge celebration, a huge worship service. And then the lights go out, the music shuts off, the crowds are silenced because the oxen stumble a little bit. And when they stumble, they step into a hole and lose their balance, and throw the ark, which is on the new cart, starts to shift, and it's going to fall off and fall onto the ground. And so Uzziah, the son, reaches out to just touch the ark and to steady it. And God's anger burns against him and smites him dead. What kind of God does this? I mean, come on. What's going on here? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Everybody's heart is turned towards God. Just like maybe all of us who are here this morning, all of us, our hearts are turned towards God. And yet, there's sin. There's sin somewhere. Sin somewhere. Oh, and maybe it's unintended sin. It's not a heart that has strayed from God. It's just an act that God said not to do, but I did, and I'm not even certain that what I did was a wrong thing to do. And that's what's happening in this text. You see, what's going on in the text, you have to understand the deeper story of the nation of Israel. You have to understand who God is. You have to understand the holiness of God to which we focused the entire worship set. every single song was focused on the holiness of God, the otherness of God, the separateness of God, the distinctiveness of God, that he is holy, meaning he is fully righteous. He is totally pure. There is no sin, absolutely zero in him. He does right all of the time. He knows what is right. He calls people to live what is right. This is who he is. And so what we need to understand is what was going on here was a nation was living in defiance and disobedience to what God had said, and maybe many of them had no clue, but they're still responsible. God hates sin, even the smallest. You see, what is happening here is God gets angry at the nation because they are not following his instructions. And there's three ways in which the nation is not following his instructions. The first one is that God had given direct instructions to the nation of Israel as to how to carry the Ark of the Covenant. This was written out for the nation. It was clearly communicated and written down. And this is what God said to them in Exodus 25. Have them make a chest of acacia wood. All right? And all of the description. And then down to verse 23. Then make poles of acacia wood and cover them with gold. And then insert the poles into rings on the sides of the ark. So 4 corners of this box have golden rings on it. Take these poles made of acacia wood that are covered with gold and slide them through the rings. And the poles are to remain in the rings of the ark. They are never to be removed. And then put in the ark of the testimony that which I will give you. Those poles for the purpose of carrying the ark on their shoulders. This is how the ark was to be transported, on your shoulders, being carried by poles, not on a new ark, not on a new cart, pulled by oxen. So they didn't follow God's instruction on how to carry the ark. The second thing they didn't follow God's instruction on is to never touch the ark. Never. Never touch the ark. In Numbers 4, we see that God gives this instruction after Aaron and his sons had finished covering the holy furnishings and all the holy articles. And when the camp is ready to move, the Kohathites are to come to do the carrying, but they must not touch the holy things or they will die. Do not touch the ark. Earlier, we mentioned this in 1 Samuel 6 is where you encountered this story. 80 years earlier, 70 people died. Why? Because they looked into the ark. They touched the ark, 1 Samuel 6. So they didn't follow God's instruction on how to carry the ark. And they're not following God's instruction on don't touch the ark, never touch the ark. Third, they're not following God's instructions on who it is to transport the ark. It's the Kohathites who are responsible to carry the ark. Numbers 3, Numbers 4 give clear description to this. It's the Kohathite clans who are responsible for carrying the ark. It's the Kohathites who are to come and do the carrying. Not 2 guys who are related to Idinabad, who aren't Kohathites, who are walking beside a cart with the ark on it. No. Very clear instructions. And the nation of Israel violated these instructions. And David, who is the king, is directly responsible for not making sure the nation understood the rules and how it is that God says this is how I'm to be approached and how I'm to be treated. And as a result, Uzziah dies. Fear comes upon the nation. Now, why these instructions? I mean, doesn't this seem a little bit like over the top or something? I'm like, come on, God, like what's the big deal? Doesn't it seem like that? It's like, you read the story, it's like, the guy he's just an innocent guy. He's trying to actually honor you, God. He's just trying to steady the ark. Like, what's the big deal? He just touched it a little bit to steady it. He wasn't trying to be disobedient and defiant. Like, come on. Why is it so significant to follow God's instructions? Well, because God is holy. And being holy, it makes him also dangerous because he's totally righteous. And anything that's impure can't be in the presence of that which is pure. And so maybe one of the ways to think about why this is such a big deal is to consider that the ark is the place where God dwells. It's the physical place where God meets with people, which therefore makes the ark sacred, which therefore makes the ark something that must be well cared for, well taken care of, and highly respected, just like nuclear energy, right? The nuclear power plant is the most effective way to make energy, but it is also the most dangerous way to make energy. The nuclear power plant has the ability to create amazing, massive amounts of energy. And if you think of God like a nuclear power plant, but God is way huger, way bigger, made up a word there, way bigger, right? Way more powerful, way more righteous and holy and pure than a nuclear power plant. And you think about what you do with a nuclear power plant in order to make the nuclear energy, right? And there's all of these chemicals and natural, I don't even know how it all works, right? Uranium and all this kind of stuff and radioactive material that comes once all of this stuff happens, right? And then there's rules and guidelines. You can see how this probably not the national rules on how to handle radioactive materials, right? And we as a nation and as people, we follow all these instructions. Why? Because nobody wants to get radiated. Nobody wants to get sick. And so we understand that. We get that. And it's the same thing here. God is way more intense, though, than nuclear power. And if we're going to treat nuclear power with immense amount of respect, God deserves way more because he is holy, holy, holy. Lord God Almighty. Secondly, this is a great dishonor to God. I mean, what do you put on a cart after all? What do you think these people use a cart for? Well, throw the lumber on there for the house that we're going to build. Get rid of these rocks for the foundations that we're going to build, right? Hey, take this garbage, throw it on the cart, and take the garbage out to the valley and dump the garbage off there, right? Bring in the harvest, throw it on the cart. The cart is utilitarian. What a dishonorable way to treat the ark of God. Remember, the very presence of God is pictured as being present there. What a great dishonor to God. Put him on a cart. Do you ever see the President of the United States driving around in a Prius, a Volkswagen Bug, or a garbage truck? No, the President of the United States rides in one of the most expensive cars, right? Or what about the Lombardi Trophy? Where did that ride? I mean, was it in the trunk, in the back of the parade, and the players, where were they? Were they just kind of stuck in some trunk in the back? Or were they on full display to deserve all the honor that they deserve? Carrying the ark with poles was a way to show honor to God. And it's the way he instructed the nation to carry it. You think of ways, modes in which people are transported. In ancient Israel and ancient Near Eastern communities, and I have a picture of this here, people were carried on around. Do we have that picture? Okay. There we go. So we have Prince William what is he now? He's got a new title, right? And Kate Middleton, new titles and all this, right? But back in March of 2021, so not too long ago, you see them being pictured here, carrying around on a throne, right? Being highly honored as they're being transported on poles. And this is to be the picture, and we got another slide here, an image of this is to be the picture of the way in which God is to be treated and to be respected. And when God is dishonored and when God is not treated the way that he rightly deserves, he gets angry. And his anger isn't Ken Dorsey kind of anger because he lost and things aren't going his way. His anger is righteous anger. It's justifiable anger. It's not just because people don't do what they're supposed to do. It's because he's like radioactivity. He deserves to be treated with the utmost care, the utmost respect. And when he's not, he burns with anger. And so as I close, I'm going to invite our worship team to come on up. I'm going to just take us to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and just ask you to think about this for a moment. For those of you who are followers of Jesus Christ, there's something that's said about you. Paul tells us, he helps us to understand in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 that your body is a temple. Your body is just like the ark. Your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God, and you are not your own. You are bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. Your body. God lives within us. And what we think about, he knows. What we feel, he's aware of. And how we behave, he's right there observing and watching it. And his heart is crushed every time we choose to disobey his instructions. And we are invited to remember that our body is the place he dwells. Lead us in a closing song.
Would you please stand with us?